Hey, what's going on? In this lesson, we're going to talk about working with dependencies in Python. We'll talk about things like lock files and dev dependencies. We're also going to talk about what that means for when we want to deploy Python, what we need to know, and we'll also touch on wheels. So let's first talk about dependencies and clear up some vocabulary and potential confusion. So we could have, when we are building software, environment tools. We could have dev dependencies, and we could have actual dependencies. You should understand the differences between these. So let's first talk about tooling. These are things that you install on your local machine. And you probably use these to help your development experience. So any kind of Visual Studio Code extension, for example, would be part of the environment tools. This is not something that is added to source control or is put on a production server. It's only a tool you use locally. However, if you're working across the team, it can be helpful to use the same tools. So my recommendation would be to add these to the README, but it wouldn't make any sense to try to put those on any kind of production server where the software is deployed. It's only used when you're actually developing the software. So any kind of linting or formatters or tools to work with databases or the code and source control, all that stuff is just used by the developer, you. But if you move to another computer or you're working with multiple people, getting everybody in that same tooling is going to be very helpful to make sure everybody's working the same. Doesn't necessarily have to be a 100% match. For example, someone might use Visual Studio Code, another person might use a different editor. Usually not a big deal as long as the written Python ends up being the same. But if you have an extension that enforces some formatting, you want to make sure that those extensions are formatting them the same so you don't end up with a bunch of changes across tons of files because someone's formatter is formatting it different than yours. Then we have dev dependencies. So this is actually code. So these are libraries, but they're still libraries used for development. So these are libraries that do not need to go on a production server or anywhere you deploy the software. They're libraries that you use for coding. These will be added to source control, but you're going to set up some way so that they don't get installed on a production server. So we'll say plus, I'm just going to use Git as an example here. So we'll add these to Git, but we will not put on server. So there's usually some way that you can indicate which libraries need to go on the server and which ones are dev dependencies. Then when you install those, you can usually pass a flag or something to say, I only want the non-dev dependencies. And that's the command that would ultimately be ran on the server. So basically the dependencies are going to be installed twice. We're going to install them locally. And then when we push the code to another environment, they will be installed again on the server. But you need to specify that we do not want the dev dependencies. It's probably not the end of the world if they get installed, but it's just going to take longer and introduce potential issues. But, if you add an extra library or two, it's probably not going to cause the server to explode. So examples of dev dependencies would be testing libraries. You usually don't need to run testing on the production server. You would just run those locally, but you do want to add that library in your list of dependencies to version control so that other developers or you on another computer, when you download that repo, you can get the exact library version. That's why we want to add to Git, and specifically we want to add this in the dependency file. So we're going to talk about that in a minute, but you don't need to actually put the library itself in version control. So what if you want to have a stage in this process where we run tests and they'll either fail or they will pass, and we can't actually deploy the code unless it passes? Well, that's going to be a separate step in that pipeline, and that runner is going to be dedicated to running those tests. So you would add that library at this step and not this step. This step should be only for running that deployed code. So testing will be separate. That is something you can do, but you don't necessarily have to have that step. You could just run the test locally. This is one of those quality assurance things. By adding it, you can have a stronger guarantee that the deployed software works the way it should, because you might forget to run those tests locally. So let's talk about how you actually put these in your code. So I said to add them to Git, but I said specifically the dependency file. So there's various ways you could do this in Python, depending on what package management software you're using. You might have a requirements file, or you could have a .toml, T-O-M-L file, which lists your dependencies. This list of dependencies is considered the source of truth. So it might look something like this, requirements.txt, or the toml file, pyproject.toml. And this is what is used to then install dependencies on your local environment when you clone that repo and when you deploy that software. The deployed environment is going to retrieve the requirements separate. So it will then go pull all of those dependencies. You're not giving the dependencies from your local environment. It will basically use the source of truth to pull them locally. So that means whenever you install this stuff and it goes in like a virtual environment file, this is considered replaceable. You don't need to put this in version control, and you don't need to send it with your deployment. So usually I'll add this to the .gitignore and any other place it would deem to be to prevent it from going to the production environment. And that is largely going to depend on where you're deploying this software. Again, this is one of those scenarios where if you deploy the virtual environment, it might not be a problem. But if you do deploy that virtual environment, there's a chance that this server will go off of the .venv instead of pulling these directly from the dependency list. That could be a problem if you are on different operating systems. So let's say you're on Windows here and you're on Linux here, but our virtual environment has Windows packages. That's bad. So that's why I would just try not to put it in the production environment at all. So let the destination retrieve the files itself. Now let's talk about lock files. So we have the original file that had the dependencies. And this is usually going to give some kind of range or rule to decide which package version to install. Random example here, it might say something like requests greater than 2.3. And this is a rule saying it has to be greater than that, but it doesn't say exactly what version to use. By keeping it general and the dependencies, we can be sure we get the latest versions. Because say we said 2.31 and it had to be equal to it, and then 2.32 comes out and it fixes something that's important, or maybe 2.4 comes out and this fixes some critical security thing. Well, our dependencies file is not even going to pick that up because it says exactly what is needed. So we kind of want to have this ability to say exactly what version while still keeping the dependencies general. So for the dependencies, we'll use greater than. In the lock file, we'll have the exact versions. So when you install from dependencies, if there is not a lock file, it will create a lock file. And this is a pretty common thing across programming languages. So in JavaScript, you'll have a package.json lock file. I think it's package lock.json. In Rust, you'll have a cargo.lock, and a similar idea across various other programming languages. So once we have that lock file, these will give the exact versions. This lock file should be added to version control. So then the next time we install, it will just get the data from the lock file and it will be able to get an exact match. That way we don't have the issue where we have small differences between environment 1 and environment 2. We want these to be exactly the same. That's why the lock file is used. But again, this is something that's replaceable. Just understand the risk. If we delete the lock file, it will then go back to the dependency list and pull new packages. So it might get a slightly different version than what we used to have. And that change in version could introduce minor bugs, or it could fix things that, might have had a security concern we didn't know about. So it could be good, it could be bad. When you're developing, you usually don't have to worry too much about this. The problem comes up when you deploy software, or if you're working in a team and you get small differences between two environments. It's because you're not using the same versions for all of the packages. So if you want to get that exact match, you need to make sure you're going off of a lock file. Especially, when you go to the production environment, we want it to match as closely as possible to our local environment. So just to wrap that up, we do want to deploy the lock file to the other environment. So we want it to be included in our source bundle. So hopefully that gives you a better understanding of lock files. Now I've mentioned this already, but when you're deploying software, that destination server, you're going to want that usually to retrieve the packages itself. That's going to work majority of the time, especially if you have that lock file, it'll get the exact same versions. You don't need to give the library files, the actual downloaded files from the package repository, to the server. The server will get it itself. However, you could still run into issues because even if you match versions exactly, you might be telling the server to install dependencies that are only used on Windows or Mac, and you're deploying to a Linux environment. So you could then figure out how to, only conditionally install certain things so it doesn't end up on the server, and it gets a little complicated. What you want to do is try to match your local environment with that deployed environment as close as possible, which is why a lot of people choose to use something like Docker, because Docker is going to basically encapsulate that environment and the needed dependencies. So then you can transfer that to another system. So you get less of a difference between the two running environments. So that is one potential option. And that's great. It does have a bit of a learning curve to learn Docker, but once you use Docker, you should be able to use that for a variety of different programming languages, and it's a pretty good skill to have. If you don't want to go down that route yet, that's fine. You can just deploy the software, read any errors carefully, and it would be probably in your best interest to get your local environment as close as possible to that production environment. So if you're deploying to a Linux operating system, maybe develop in a Linux environment and deploy from there. So you have options here. The last thing I wanted to talk about in this lesson is the concept of wheels. So when you find a package, let's say scikit-learn, and you go look at that package on the package index, it's going to have a tar.gz. This is the source. And then it will also have wheels. So there's going to be a single source, and this is the code, but the wheels will have taken that code and prepared it for various platforms. So any kind of compiling that needs to be done, any pre-work needed to get it to work on a certain platform is already done for you. So with the wheels, there's going to be a bunch of different versions for different operating systems and architectures and Python versions. So just for example, I don't know exactly what the name would look like, but it might be something like this: x86, Windows, Python 3.15. These wheels are not cross-compatible, so there will be a bunch of different wheels for different platforms. Basically, the library creator did the work for you, already taking it from source, bringing it to what you need on your platform. So if you get some kind of error where it can't find a wheel or it's having an issue producing a wheel, it's probably coming back to the fact that the environment does not have what it needs to go from this tar file to the compiled, ready to go version. And there's not already a wheel that you could just use. So as a different example, let's say you're working with some library and this thing requires Windows. Well, it's not going to have a wheel for Linux. So if you try to install it on Linux, it's going to have issues using that source code. And you're going to get an error talking about wheels. Basically, you need to make sure a couple of things. Whatever library you're using, I just use this one as an example, but any of the libraries, you need to make sure that it's compatible on the operating system you're using and the architecture. So if you're using ARM or x86, and the Python version. The author can provide wheels, but they are not required to. They likely will if there's any kind of C compilation required, or they just want to increase the speed and easiness of downloading the library. If there is no wheel available for your platform, then your package installer may try to still use the library from source, which may or may not work depending on the requirements. It may require you to install a C compiler or some other dependency in order for that dependency to be installed all of the way. This again shows why getting everything on the same platform or using something like Docker can be very handy, because you only have to go through this process once up front on your system, and then you're much less likely to run into issues deploying down the road. You just got to bite that bullet and learn the learning curve of Docker, which isn't too bad, but just adds another layer you have to work through. And as a beginner, that can be complicated. But I would say it's probably worth learning, because then you can avoid issues down the road. And those will take time as well. So that's an overview of dependencies and wheels. Hopefully this has been really helpful to give you an introduction. In the next lesson, we will go through some hands-on exercises for this so you can solidify this information. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson in this course. See you there.